Good afternoon, everybody. This is Arun here, co-founder at Sharpsell. So I just wanted to share, my experiences of spending a lot of time on the field and understanding how selling actually works. So with the name, I'm sure you kind of would probably relate. So we kind of make tools to help sellers become experts when they're in front of the customer. And our journey has been quite interesting because we started in 2010 as a learning tech company where a lot of our focus was on something called simulation-based learning, where we help CXOs and CEOs understand the hard and soft skills of running a business using business simulations, and that kind of worked quite well. We did a lot of work with middle managers after that. They liked what we did. And we are today the world's largest simulation platform provider as N Paradigm. So that company was called N Paradigm. So that worked very well. But what we realized was that when we started working with middle managers, they liked what we did. They said, why don't you work with frontline sales teams? And when we started working with frontline teams, we realized that what worked with senior managers doesn't really work with frontline teams in terms of learning. So we created a few mobile learning modules. We rolled it out to people, and we said, let's see what happens. And post rolling out, we realized that people did these modules for about 2-3 days, and after that, they would stop doing it. And when we tried to understand why, and typically, you do follow-up calls, call up and say, sir, kya hua, bhaiya, kyun nahi kiya modules? And people would say, you know what, the modules are very good, but I really don't have time. I'm on the field, I'm going around talking to people, so please excuse me. So we said, no problem, let's kind of shadow some of these guys. And when we shadowed people, we realized that, they have a lot of time, They would have typically anywhere between half an hour to 2 hours every day, which is unplanned. But people would still not go back and learn. And when we tried to understand why, people came back with 2 reasons. They said, one, Arun, this is all gyan. I know this because I do this day in, day out. So don't give me gyan and tell me what I should do again and again, because I know that. Whether they know it or not, the answer was I know it. And the second question that they had was, they said, hey, my problem is not that, I don't know all this. My problem is, how do I look like an expert in front of my customer? Because I get one chance with this client. So in that one chance, I have to go ahead and impress this person. So if you can help me look like an expert, then we'll talk. Otherwise, all this is gyan. I'm not really interested. And what we also realized was that salespeople were looking at immediate gratification. So for them, as long as they could use something today, tomorrow, you made a lot of sense. But the moment you say, hey, why don't you study this, come back and use it in a month's time, they lost interest, because for them 1 month is already long-term plan. So their first objective is to say, how do I not get screamed at by my boss? Because every week, the bottom 25 percentile gets screamed at in a weekly call in very uncivil conversations. The next was to say, how do I hit my numbers and get my incentive for this week and this month? And then you talk about saying, hey, how do I look at my long-term plan? How do I look at what my career growth is, et cetera, et cetera. So we realized this was the reality of what the sales on the front line was across different industries. So specifically, we spent a lot of time with insurance advisors, people selling bank products, CASA, asset products, mutual funds, etc. And the reality was very, very similar across. So what we did was we took a sabbatical, myself and my other co-founder called Hanuman. So we took a sabbatical from the learning business that we were doing, and we spent a lot of time on the field. For example, Hanuman became an LIC advisor. Spend time with LIC advisors on the field to understand how people sell insurance. I spent time on, in 20 plus small towns in India to really understand how financial service products are sold. And with this, we created, a product called Sharpsell. So the whole idea of Sharpsell was to say, how do you make your sellers look like experts in front of the customer? And how do you make your sellers sales ready when they're not in front of the customer? And initially, we started working with insurance companies, because I think our research started with insurance. And now we work with banks, NBFCs, mutual fund, AMCs, et cetera, et cetera. So, and we've won a lot of global awards. We have more than 3 lakh people using our platform day in, day out. And these are some of the clients with whom we work. So the idea here was to share some of our thoughts in terms of what we've seen working on the field. So when we started, before we started getting deeper into Sharpsell, we did a lot of primary research. You speak to people in senior management, you try to understand what are the support systems that are already available for the sales guy. So you'll see that, there are a lot of these initiatives that go on sales, L&D, et cetera. But what we realize is, one, for most people, sales is not a dream job. So they land there because that's probably their last option job, or that's the only job that they found. So you seldom hear people talk about, wanting to be somebody super big in sales. And that's the reality for most people. They graduate, they have to find some job, and this is a job that they get. Second is the engagement with, the sellers on the field is very low because most of them are on the field. So the single touch point you have is with your team lead. And a lot of times people don't even come to branches. So the second question was to say, how do I keep them engaged? Because I think, what I'm telling you is going to apply pre-pandemic, and I think it's kind of rearing its ugly head again. So NBFC frontline was one of the few industries where we heard people talk about monthly attrition rates outside of BPO. So people would talk about, hey, what's your attrition? It's like 6%, 7% per month. But otherwise, it was very easy for people to jump jobs because, for 1,000 rupees, people will jump job. And the deal was that if you could just jump jobs for one company every year, you have, 40 companies out there and you could actually get your career done. So it was quite easy for people to switch jobs. There was, you put too much pressure, people know that you're going to switch. And the engagement part was becoming an issue. And the third part was productivity. There's a lot of attrition, infant attrition that came in. People who stayed, there's a big, push to retain them, etc., etc. So this is what we realized was a reality, and the plain vanilla learning that we started with didn't really work. So what we did was, we looked at what really was the challenge that they faced, which the training at that point of time was not really solving. So what we realized was, one, they really don't have a lot of knowledge about industry and the product. And a lot of times what we saw was companies start with product training. You get them into a class, you tell them about the company, and then you say, let me tell you how 10 of our products work. And there is a lot of hurry to dump a lot of product knowledge on them with a limited window that you get with them. And we've seen that most people don't retain any of that, and most of it goes over the head. The next is, even though people might know products, they're not really able to relate to the customer issues and customer problems. So, it's not to say that they can't talk about the product, but they're not really able to pitch a product which relates to the customer. So you would still go and say, sir, hello, I want to talk to you about ABC product, and that typically falls on deaf ears because customer keeps hearing the same pitch again and again. On the phone, you have people calling up, messaging, etc., etc. The next is you have like poor sales, customer management skills, ability to handle objections. So I think all of us can relate to some of this. So I don't want to get into the details of each of this, but these are typically issues that we saw. And the last one is a little important because when we spoke to people, there are a lot of resources to help them learn. People say, I have training, I'll give you brochures, etc. But what we saw lacking was material for them to train or educate the customer. Because you either have marketing collateral, which was too high level. A guy on the field will never use marketing collateral. Or you had content which was training content, which is too simplistic, which you can't use with the customer. So what we realized was there's not enough material for the guy on the field to kind of engage and educate the customer, because it's not really possible for somebody to absorb everything, learn everything, and then go educate the customer. That's not, that doesn't work with 90% of the frontline sales teams that we have seen. That's not the profile of people who are working there. So with this, we realized that we have to do sales enablement. And one of the cycles that we got stuck with is that people would typically, so before I go into this, so what we had seen is people would typically call the top performing guys and say, hey, let's try to understand what these top guys are doing, let's replicate it across, and then we'll percolate it down. And we saw that failed miserably because the expectation that the habits of the top performers can be replicated by everyone else doesn't really work, because they are doing something because of who they are, and there are certain other people who are not doing it because they either do not have the ability to do it or they do not want to do it. Maybe some small percent can benefit from that, but to kind of say that let's replicate everything failed miserably. We tried knowledge management, we tried sessions, etc., that didn't work. So when we dug deeper, we realized that this depends on two main things. So first is what we call buyer maturity, and other is seller maturity. So buyer maturity talks about how much of your product category does your buyer really understand. So if you say insurance, there are some people who already have insurance and they know what they're getting into. There are other people who don't have even, let's say, basic health insurance. So what you look at in terms of how much of your product is your buyer familiar with, and how easy is it for them to get into your ecosystem and get going. That's what we are going to call as buyer maturity. And The other part is seller maturity, which is at what stage of maturity is your seller in the market. So when you look at buyer maturity, I'll say low is where buyer is unaware of what the product is, and high is where they need to know. And you just have to tell them why they should work with you and not with your competition. So there you're not educating them about the product, but you're really telling them why you and why not somebody else. And when you look at seller maturity, a low seller maturity I would define as somebody who knows the product, who can go, who's kind of, let's say, by-hearted a pitch, who can go and like pour the pitch out, but can't really do anything beyond that. So the next thing they would say is, I'll get back to you, sir, or they'll say, let me call you my senior. So, and somebody with high is somebody who's experienced, who knows the product, and they are typically people who don't, the top 20% of people who probably give you 80% of your business, who don't really need a lot of traditional hand-holding because they know what they're doing. And what we realized was that, and of course the other part is product maturity, which I'm not getting into because that's very, very specific to the organization. But assuming that everything else with product is similar, what we've seen is what has to be done to enable a seller with respect to the kind of buyer is very different for different categories. For example, let's say if you have a low seller maturity and you have a low buyer maturity, the whole idea here is to say, how are you going to engage with the customer? Because the customer does not really know a lot about your product or category. So the question should be, how are you going to enable your salesperson to engage with your customer? How are you going to help your salesperson understand the basics, and how are you going to help them learn the basics from peers? Because in this case, they don't really have to go and wow the customer. They just have to stay with the customer and ensure that the customer comes in. But when you look at a place where your seller maturity is low, but your buyer really understands the product, buyer knows what they're getting into, they've experience with your product, etc. What is really required is ready-to-use sales pitches, just-in-time objections, comparison FAQs, because the customer knows way better than you do. So how are you going to help them just in time, and how are you going to help them wow the customer at that point of time? And the expectation is that they'll just have basic knowledge to tell the customer that, hey, trust me, I know that you know more than me, but please trust me, I'm here in this with you. But if you go to the other side where seller maturity is high, they already know how to handle customers. So when you talk about somebody with, a buyer who does not know about this, what they want to do is to say, hey, can you give me some tools where I can portray this customer story back to them? I have to tell them that I understand their reality. So give me tools where I can just use to capture their basic reality and tell them something back. It's something that really works well. And let's say when you have seller maturity is low, seller maturity is high, buyer maturity is high. This is where a lot of traditional tools in terms of enablement don't really work, because every seller who's mature has their own way of selling. So they don't follow standard pitches. They've got their own pitches. They've got their own sales conversation. They've got their own flow. So there, you can't restrict them with saying, hey, this is how my tool works. This is how you're going to take a pitch. That really fails. So what they would want to do is to say, hey, help me how I can get referrals. Can you automate some of these processes that I do day in, day out? Can you help me ask for referrals? Can you kind of help me, create some of these presentations, et cetera, is what they're looking at. So with this understanding, we looked at saying, how do you make these sales conversations effective? So one of the other questions that usually comes to us is, hey, you say sales enablement, but we already have a CRM. So, so we can't do anything. We say that's good because a CRM typically tells you, it either does one of the two things. It says, hey, there is somebody called, let's say, Rohan. It says, go and meet Rohan and tell me what happened. Or let's say you meet somebody called Abhijit. It says, please tell me that you met somebody called Abhijit. But what happens during the conversation that you have is not really something that anybody has control on. So today we talk about data, we talk about how you're going to really look at using customer data, et cetera, But one key part that gets missed out here is what happens during the interaction between your sales guy and the customer. How you're really able to, one, equip this person to, have a good conversation, and how do you track back what conversation is had on the field. So what we realized was the moment you ask your salesperson to punch in something, they switch off. I mean, for them, CRM is a overhead. They say, boss, this is, in their minds, it's beyond their work. That's something that they have to do in the evening, that they have to do on Friday, et cetera. And the moment you say, enter more information, they are going to zone out. And they'll, the reality is, I only enter what is bare minimum required. So what we say is, as part of Sharp Sell, the moment I allow you to, let's say, create hyper-personalized presentation for your customer during the customer meeting, and you're able to share it on WhatsApp right then, right there. What we say is you're not really giving me any more information. You're making something for the customer, you're sharing it, and what I do in the meantime is to capture all that data. So there's nothing that you're doing for the management or for the sake of process, but what you're really doing is to use a tool that enables you to have good conversations, a tool that enables you to stay in touch with the customer, the tool that enables you to show that you're the expert, and that's all completely, your branding, your photo, etc., which is for your benefit. But by the way, we also understand what is happening and we keep tracking this, etc., etc. So this is something that we really worked on. And the whole idea was across different stages of your sales conversation, how do you really help them at each stage? Because the other thing about learning was always considered like a corporate agenda that somebody is putting on your head. So our question was to say, how do you make people come to learning? And how do you make people do that while you enable them with all these things? So we said, let's look at the sales cycle. You talk about getting a meeting, follow-up, customer meeting, then you onboard, then you do upsell, cross-sell, etc. We said at every stage of your customer sales process, our objective was to say, how are you going to make this person look like the expert so that at every stage the customer knows that, hey, this guy is able to get back to me real fast. This guy knows what he's talking about. And anything that I want, he's able to get back. So you talk about tools for customer nurturing. We use something called marketing posters, where we say every day you can send a short note about your company, about your product, without appearing salesy, because 95% of your leads you don't really stay in touch with as a salesperson. Same way, when you talk about in the customer meeting, how are you going to make presentation based on customer reality? If a customer says, hey, I want to do something, I want to take some personal loan for my marriage, then how are you going to make a presentation which says, sir, we have helped hundreds of people, get their daughters married off. Please work with us. That's very different from saying, hey, we have a personal loan, interest rate is between X and Y, give these documents. So how are you able to convey that emotion to the person? Because in case of loans specifically, even though customers come to us, they're not only coming to us, they're going to go to like 10 different people. So how are you going to stay ahead of the curve and say, you know what, I know you have asked 5 different people for the same need, but I'm the one who's going to help you, walk the path. So this is something that we do as SharpSell, and I just want to talk about one small case study. So we work with a huge financial service conglomerate, and post implementing SharpSell, so we did 2 things. One is we said we'll kind of handhold all new employees who kind of come in for the first 3 months using SharpSell learning, and post that there is an enablement that kind of, I talked about the sales process, how you do it. So what we saw was, for all the people who are active on the platform, their sales went up by 50+%. There's a 40% increase in the average sale in the first 3 months when we handheld those people. And there's a 50% higher number of files compared to, for who are completed at least 70% of learning, they were able to do 50% more business than the people who did less than 70%. And typically you have like, the whole engagement level also goes up, because we have about 4 million plus conversations happening per year, 97% of people adopt. And with a certain client, we've also had a case where by using these enablement solutions, we were able to understand agents who were interested in working with us, but who never gave us any business. So we looked at the activation level there, we looked at the engagement levels, and then figured out and were able to identify people who could specifically be reactivated. So that's what we try to do, where we say, how are you going to equip your frontline salesperson look like an expert? So this is SharpSell, and one of the other things that we've done is we started as a mobile-first platform. Now we've become, we're moving towards what we call a faceless SharpSell, where you say SharpSell should be available wherever your sellers are. Which means that if it has to be integrated with your Salesforce app, it is integrated. We have SDKs. If it has to be integrated as a browser plugin, it is available in Chrome. It is available as a web app. If you say it has to be integrated part of your sales flows, it is available. So we're looking at, other CRM integrations, etc. So the whole idea is, how are you going to enable this salesperson to sell better and improve their productivity is what the focus is. So, like I said, we have a lot more case studies. We have a lot more learning in terms of implementing this across different NBFCs, be it like housing finance, be it like personal loans, be it selling like two-wheeler, commercial vehicle loans, etc. So we've got a lot of case studies where we've seen some success there. So I just thought I'll use this platform to share a brief idea of what we do at SharpSell and share some of our success stories. And if any of you are interested to knowing more about what we do, we are available right outside. And And that's it from my side. I thought I'll keep it short. I'm sure we're, me included, are eager to see what the next panel has to offer to us. So with this, I conclude my presentation. So thanks a lot, folks, for your patient listening. Really appreciate this, and take care. Bye.
Anil Gupta, Chief Partnership Officer, ARTH Impact Digital Loans Private Limited, to kindly climb up the stage, and to felicitate Mr. Arun Subramaniam, Co-Founder and Chief Business Officer, Sharpcell. Please, sir.